Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Jonathan Shane is a functional nutrition therapist and an expert in ketogenic nutrition. After overcoming an 8-year battle with bulimia and body image issues, he knows the struggles of finding true health and food freedom. He has devoted his life and experience to helping his clients take control of their health and wellness. He specializes in ketogenic diets, metabolism, and holistic health. Jonathan found the ketogenic diet in 2017 and has used it to overcome his own health issues and has now shifted his focus to help others find true health. He is the owner of the Keto Road, a company dedicated to helping others discover their best health through low-carbohydrate nutrition. At the Keto Road, they believe that health starts with a healthy foundation of fat metabolism through a ketogenic approach. He is also the founder of PerformanceGains.com, a company whose aim is to help everyday people increase their performance. I was fortunate enough to meet Jonathan at KetoCon 2023. His energy is absolutely infectious, and I absolutely loved his presentation titled Individual Keto, How to Do Keto for Your Individual Needs. You can find Jonathan on Instagram at the Keto Road. Jonathan Shane, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
What's up, man? I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Dude, it's so great to have you. I have to point out that introduction is greatly abbreviated. There's so many more things you've done, podcasts, more than one, all kinds of companies you started, all kinds of products and programs, and all kinds of stuff that you've done. And one of the funny things about researching you for this episode was trying to figure out, like, is this same dude doing all of these different things? And also beyond that is your picture is kind of different in every single one. Like when I met you in person, you had a great beard going, man. Now you don't. And so there's pictures of you with the big beard and pictures of you without them, with all the different companies, everything you've got going on. So I was like, is this the same guy? I think it's the same guy. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, I made the joke earlier. My wife is married to like 10 men. Like it's like I changes all the time. And it doesn't help, like my beard grows really fast. So like, for example, I had to shave like every 2 days, or like within like a week, I'll have like 10 o'clock shadow. And within 90 days, I'll have a beard again. Like, so I think I grew out a full beard 3 times a year.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I've always wanted to do it, but I always get stuck by like the awkward, like 3 week kind of like commitment period where it gets like really coarse and itchy. And it's like, you either got to push past that or like give up. And I don't have the same, will that you have. You're out running ultra marathons and doing all kinds of stuff out there. I'm a quitter. Apparently I get to 3 weeks. I'm just like, I'm done with this.
That's funny. Yeah. I would not know if I would associate ultra marathons with beard growing, but that's an interesting connection.
Definitely. It's just that ability to keep going, to push through, to get through tribulations and all kinds of stuff.
Savage. I'll
Overcoming
remember that
challenges.
now.
The beard challenge, the 3 week beard barrier.
Yeah.
It's insurmountable to normal people like me.
I like that.
Dude, so lots of things obviously that we can talk about today. I do mean that your presentation was wonderful at KetoCon. I know you presented at KetoCon multiple times. This was a breakout session, and this was one that I had circled on my calendar well before the conference. It was one that I wanted to leave kind of the main venue to go check out what you were presenting on. I thought the presentation was wonderful. You did such a good job. You were very engaged, and you could feel it with the people in the room. They really appreciated your information. They appreciated your humor. And so I just want to lead this conversation by saying, great job. You did an amazing job with that presentation.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. I got similar feedback from other people too. And it warms my heart to know that, my experiences, my tribulations, my traumas, my past, and my overcoming of that, and my education, everything that's happened in my life up to this point, being able to pack that into a message and share that with others and have it well received means a lot to me. So I was super grateful for the feedback, and I'll be excited to be able to speak again next year, hopefully.
Yeah, that would be great. And so basically, I haven't been able to watch the presentation. I don't think the videos are live yet. Is that true?
Not yet. Yeah, not yet.
Yeah. Gotcha. So, if nothing else, I thought it would be fun today to kind of go over some of your main points, not exactly copy exactly what you did, but make an audio recording of some of your main points with me being able to ask you questions. So, this can live in audio podcasting land forever. And I can go back and listen to it whenever I want, which is going to be great. But before we get to that, we do need to talk about your traumas, some of the things we mentioned in the introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal story through the health field and why you do what you do today?
Yeah, for sure. So my journey really started when I was 14. I was an emotional eater growing up. And so when I was 14, I was 260 pounds at 14. Didn't lift weights or anything. So it was a very much an overweight, obese, unhealthy 260 pounds. And I was scared into losing weight, which I'm actually grateful for. But went on this journey of weight loss, running, lifting, starving myself, eating basically nothing but like chicken breasts, skim milk, spinach leaves, frozen bagged veggies, and Captain Crunch. And like, that's all I ate. Lost 100 pounds. But in the process, just due to my fear of social acceptance, the lack thereof, getting bullied and stuff, I developed a real fear of gaining the weight again. And with the way I was eating, it was triggering a lot of binge issues. And so I had to figure out how to be able to satisfy this binge craving, but also satisfy my need to feel like I was going to be accepted by the peers among me. And so bulimia kind of manifested itself through that. And was at first was just like during binges, and then it got progressively worse. And over the course of the first 2 years of me having the eating disorder, I went from, maybe once a week or so to twice a day, every day. Parents found out. That was a big issue. And then when I was almost 17, so this would have been about 2 years into it, I found my faith in Christ, and that really helped a lot because it kind of gave me, it gave me value outside of me, which was the first time I had that, and it was unconditional. And so I really clung to that, and it really helped me start fighting it, but it didn't completely go away because things don't just magically go away because you start believing in something. And you got to work at it. And I wasn't really working at it at the time. So fast forward, and at this time, I've been obsessed with fitness and health this whole time. Fast forward to 20, I'm married. I'm still struggling with my issues. 23 years old now, and my wife still occasionally finds throw up on the toilet every couple months. I found keto on Facebook one day, and it was actually a Brandon Carter video. Do you know who that is, Brandon Carter?
I don't know that I do. I want to say Backstreet Boys, but I think that's wrong.
No, yeah, no. It's this black guy. He calls himself the Keto King, and I don't know if he's as busy on social media as he used to be, but he has this video of him like going to eat like lettuce, and he starts breaking the lettuce and chunking it on the floor, and he's like, "That's my food's food. That's what my food eats. I want to lose weight on bacon." And I was like, "This is cool." So gave it a shot, loved it. And then I went 9 months without a relapse. Did a bodybuilding show on it. Now, mind you, I was still in an unhealthy place. My metabolism was a wreck. So I didn't like get super shredded for this show, but it was just like the act of doing it without giving into like eating disorder urges was crazy. And went 9 months without a relapse. And then on the way out of the dieting from that, I ended up relapsing again. It was September 15th of 2018. And I was like, okay, so keto's good, nutrition's good. So I have the spiritual health, right? I love Jesus. I love keto. What am I missing? And I was like, oh, I don't love myself. That probably is important. And so I started really working on self-love and self-identity and building like true deep-rooted values and boundaries that would keep me away from the things that I would depend on when I felt like I wasn't worth anything. And that's really where my healing journey really started to come full circle. And I haven't relapsed since. It'll be 5 years this September. Yeah, 5 years this September. And in that process of that, I became a keto coach soon after that, started speaking out against men and body image issues and eating disorders, and really building an audience through that vulnerability in that part of my life. And then I decided to go to nutritional therapy school and decided to take a risk and become an entrepreneur and buy my own company. And once I graduated from nutritional therapy school, which would have been June of 2020, right during the lockdowns, actually, I literally went through school during the lockdowns. Once I graduated, I started to focus my practice on metabolic health, fixing metabolisms, dealing with metabolic inflammations, cellular health, hormone, sex hormone balance and imbalances, etc. And that was really fun. And then I got into running, and running gave me some issues, although I loved it. It gave me some issues doing a strict ketogenic diet. And so I started, we can definitely flesh this out, but I started dabbling with cyclical keto and found that that really worked really well. And then I started to see the parallels between like the environment ultra running creates and the female body. And I started to see where a lot of the inconsistencies in like the narrative that's pushed in the mainstream keto space was actually hurting women long term. And so I started working with women on that. And once I got really confident in how to deal with women as individuals in terms of like who needs what, based off of symptoms and analysis there, I started to really speak out about it. Probably about 7 months ago is when I started really speaking about it. I've been working with women for a little over almost 2 years at that point, but I really started to speak out about it about 6 months ago, the beginning of this year. And it's been really awesome to help as many women as I have heal. And so that's where we're at. And that gets us today. Oh yeah. And then of course, performance gains. You're right. I have done a lot, haven't I? Sometimes in the moment you like, because the day-to-day things, you're like, oh, today's like the day. And like, I'm mad I'm not where I want to be in 5 years. But then like sometimes when you're talking it out, you're just like, geez, man, what the heck?
Wow. Well, I love the concept of like understanding where you want to go, but also looking back and appreciating how far you've come. And you have come very far with that journey. I'm so embarrassed that I answered anything about Backstreet Boys. I may just go back and edit that whole thing out to not embarrass myself. Okay, so I think myself and the audience kind of sort of know about bulimia and what it is, but maybe we just kind of assume that. So I'm wondering if you could kind of explain what exactly is bulimia, or what would you want somebody to know about it? What makes it different than anorexia? Is it just the purging? Like, what are some of the components of bulimia, and what sorts of things did you suffer through that?
Yeah, so this isn't like the medical or like professional way of describing this, but I always say that bulimia is like anorexia and binge eating disorder had a child. It's like the middle ground. It's where someone is able to give in to their binge desires, but also starve themselves at the same time by purging. So bulimia is the act of someone that has a compulsive habit of overeating and then purging that food out generally via vomiting. That is bulimia. That's what I did. I stuck my fingers down my throat after meals and made myself puke. And I did that for a very long time. And the thing is though, is that it can start from like binges, but then it can get more extreme where it's like every meal, right? Like I remember throwing up salads. Like, why was I throwing up salads? Who knows? But I was. And so the biggest difference between, I would say, anorexia and bulimia is that anorexia, there's more of a focus on starvation, whereas bulimia, there's more of a focus on eating, but still like getting rid of the food anyway. So like a bulimic will still look malnourished, even though they're eating their meals, which can be really puzzling to some people. Whereas anorexics, it's pretty obvious they're just not eating a lot. And there is some crossover, right? Like there are, like, for example, there were times that I wasn't being bulimic, but it's the only reason I wasn't being bulimic is because I was acting anorexic. I was eating 500 calories a day for like 3 weeks straight, 4 weeks straight, and that was maintaining my weight loss. And so I didn't feel the need to binge and purge, but then I would binge and then I would make myself throw up, right? And same thing, anorexics may go weeks without eating and then feel the need to binge, go see the bloat in the stomach, freak out, go make themselves puke. Right. So like there's a lot of crossover between anorexia and bulimia for sure. I would say the biggest difference between the two is like bulimia, there's definitely like an emphasis on the need, because like I wasn't anorexic. I had anorexic tendencies at times, but I was not like someone that just completely didn't eat just so I could lose weight. Like I was very much like I ate 3 meals a day. I just puked 3 meals a day up. And so there's also bulimic tendencies, and this is some crossover because I don't want to say that someone has bulimia, but I definitely think this is a sketchy line, is like, and we see this in this keto space a lot, is like people that will binge like 4,000 calories, but then they'll fast for 2 days straight, right? So they're binging and then purging, right? Or like they'll binge and then they'll purge via 3-4 hours of cardio, but it's cardio walking, so it's healthy, right? So I eat, But the thing is like, that's not why they're doing it. They really know they're doing it because they're trying to burn off the food that they ate yesterday because they're scared
Interesting.
it's going to ruin their goals. Right. And so, the act of purging can manifest in many ways, but it's most common in terms of like actual vomiting.
Okay. I'm really glad I asked that question. You just taught me tons of different things I didn't know about bulimia. What about eating disorders and men? Is this a very prevalent thing that not many people are talking about? It seems like we only focus on women and and eating disorders. How often is this happening with men?
Oh, it happens a lot, dude. Bulimia is very common in men. So that's where things are weird. So like I've actually been asked this question before. Like someone asked me on a podcast when my parents found out I had bulimia, did I ever hear the idea that like it was just a girl's disease? Like they wouldn't expect me. And I said no, actually, no one brought it up. So like I never considered it like, oh, this is like something that generally women deal with and men don't. But I do know that that's generally in the larger public eye, that is generally what's thought, is that like this is something that because women tend to struggle with body image issues more. Women tend to struggle with eating disorders more. But the reality is that's not the case. In fact, if we look at the statistics of body dysmorphia, more men have body dysmorphia per capita than women do. Right. The difference really, and that's not, and honestly, it's not something I want to win. Like, I don't want the men to like win this. Right. So like, I'm not saying this because I'm like, oh yeah, we're better. It's like, no, like, it's not good, but it's the fact. It's like men struggle with body image a lot. And men have eating disorders. Men starve themselves. Men make themselves throw up. The difference is that this is going to sound odd, but and this is multifaceted, and this could be like a really long part of this conversation, really, if we really get into the worms of it, because like with women, there tends to be like almost like a cliche acceptance of it, meaning like, you like in all the shows, you'll have like that one chick that has an eating disorder, that one chick that has body image issues. You'll have, groups of friends that like all like laugh about how they're not eating because they're trying to get their waist smaller, right? They're showing like anorexic tendencies, but like that's like, and then the women watching the show will have a group of women they do, and they'll all giggle about how the show is like them. And there's like this acceptance among women about like this thing that is not okay, but it's kind of normal, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's only not okay or something that really needs to be addressed if it gets super severe and someone looks sick. So like there's like this weird like okayness to it in society. Whereas with men, like to be able to talk about the fact that you don't like who you are, or that you think you're fat and ugly, or that you have body gym issues, like even like having an eating disorder, it shows weakness, and men are not allowed to be weak. Men are not allowed to be vulnerable. Men have to be these tough monsters, or that just shut up and never express anything. And so a lot of the times it gets bottled up. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for a man being tough. I'm all for masculinity. But I think part of masculinity is being strong enough to be okay with how you're feeling and deal with it. And a lot of men aren't like that. They're actually because they don't process anything, they're actually super sensitive, vulnerable, and have no self-control over this masculinity that they say they have, which I don't think is masculinity. I actually think it's immaturity. I think it's very boyish to be strong and to have power and not know how to control it because you don't know how to process your emotions. But there's a lot that's a whole other subject. But there's a lot of men that just don't talk about it. But it's very prevalent in men, for sure. I've gotten many, many DMs about eating disorders in men, for sure.
Wow. This all has to be exacerbated by social media, right? Like we are in such a bad place with self-image, and it goes in either direction. Like there's the whole like fat shaming versus metabolic health kind of conversation that we're always having. And of course, we're not supposed to shame people for being big or looking in any particular way. Yet there's also a health component, a metabolic health component to all of it. We're not in a good space with any of this.
No, we're not. No. The health like the health space in the world is a toxic mud pit. And the problem that is there is that there's a lot of people that are fake. There's a lot of fakeness going on. But you're right. There's also a lot of people that just want to be okay with who they are, even if that's unhealthy. And so they're trying to rally around certain culture movements or whatever to make sure that to basically reinforce this idea that they're okay just the way they are. But I always say like self-love is not just accepting yourself the way you are, but also loving yourself enough to do something about it. right?
Love
And
that.
so it's like it's both, right? But we don't talk about both because people like tribalism, right? You have to either be on the extreme or this extreme. You can't be in the middle because no one likes being in the middle, because humans naturally like to be attracted to a tribe where they feel supported, they feel like they have a community. So that's one psychological aspect of it. And so just because of that, there's a lot of toxicity and mess, and there's a lot of confusion. But then on the flip side, you can't just run away from it. Like, you can make sure you're not absorbing the negativity in the space by like posting and ghosting and all that stuff. But like, you have to realize that like voices like yours and eyes. Yeah.
That works. It
Has
works.
to we have to talk in the space. Like, we have to be a part of the space because someone needs to bring sound logic and a chance of that glimmering light in the corner of the room needs to be there, because then we're just leaving millions of people that are in this vacuum left to die, literally, and that's not good either.
Yeah, I really like that approach and that perspective. Thank you again for going there. I seriously, there were honest questions. I learned a lot about all of those topics and bulimia in particular. How did you become so interested in women's health? I feel thousands times more confident coaching men than I do on women. I am constantly changing my mind about everything when it comes to women. Seems a much more complicated thing. Don't you already have enough going on in your life with everything else you're doing to get tangled up in women's health?
Yeah, so it definitely can be more complicated, and I say that in the most like unbiased way possible. It's just the way we are biologically. Like, men are just simpler. Like, our hormones are on a 24-hour clock. Generally, if you get us to stop eating Snickers, we melt like hot butter in a pan. Women don't tend to lose weight like that. They don't tend to heal like that. There's a lot of complexity. They're on a 28-day hormone cycle that links with the moon. Like, there's so many variables and things that you could talk about. I think one reason I really like it, like, and I think this is like more of a subconscious thing. I was raised by a single mom. And I watched her struggle, and I've also watched her thrive. And so I think that there's a subconscious, because a lot of what I work with happens to be like and this part of this is because I'm young, but a lot of the women I work with are older than me. I don't work with a lot of women younger than me. And there's like this, I like seeing women as they age thrive. Like, there's something about that's a win for me. And I think that has a lot to do with like watching my mom and wanting her to thrive and watching her go through seasons of struggle. So I think that plays a big subconscious part. It's not something I think in the forefront of my mind, but I think it's something that drives me internally. Secondly, with someone with ADHD, I don't like mundaneness. Like, I don't like just doing the same thing every single day. And so working with women is a lot of fun because they are complex. And so like every day is a new day, every month. Like, I could have, 3 good months, and all of a sudden everything shifts and I have to like stop, redirect, figure it out, talk them through it. For me, that's exciting because it keeps me on my toes, right? There's never a dull day in the coaching that I do, which is fun. And then what really got me into it, though, like, those are the reasons I love doing it. What really got me into it was when I started ultra running, I started to notice that I was having issues with cortisol as a strict ketogenic athlete. In fact, I don't know if this is going to be out at the same time this next one is, but I just did a podcast with Robert Sykes, Keto Savage, and we literally just dove deep into this about like carbs and running and all that.
I love him.
And huh?
I love him.
Yeah. Oh, I love him too. No, he's a great man. I respect him a lot. But so with the running, I found that strategic carbs helped suppress my cortisol, which actually helped me burn fat better. I remember I actually talked about this in the presentation. I was on the exact same amount of calories on these 2 photos that I showed, but like I was much leaner in one, and the one I was much leaner in was the one I was targeting carbs, and I wasn't doing strict keto. And that had a lot to do with the cortisol and inflammation regulation in my system due to the stress of the running. And at the same time, I started working with a client of mine, a female client, and we started discussing things. And I started to notice like her hormones looked a lot like mine, which really got me. I was like, interesting. And this was someone that had struggled with an eating disorder like me. This is someone that had struggled with the idea of bringing carbs back in, right? And so I was like, okay, this was a really good opportunity for me because I could figure out, okay, how can I help her by adapting what I've adapted, but also while navigating having an eating disorder and realizing that the carbs you used to eat were a part of what fed that eating disorder. I dealt with that too. And so I was really able to handle this from a unique position, because there are other women that try to get their women clients to reintroduce carbs, but have no idea what it's like to have an eating disorder and how to navigate that reintroduction around that. So the only thing I didn't have was being a woman myself, but I had all the other experiences there. And so this client was willing to go on this journey with me. And we went on this journey for 2 years. For 2 years, we worked on different types of carb cycling and her weight and her health. And finally, after about 18 months, we saw her fasted insulin, because she was on strict keto, and her fasted insulin tripled. It got up to like 15 on keto. And then we got her on carb cycling, and we got it back down to 5. Adding carbs in cut her insulin by 10 points, which is wild. And we just saw all these health markers improve. And when I realized there was freedom in it, and I realized how to do it, that's when I was like, okay, I can help women here. And I started talking about it. And what's really blew my mind was, I remember I started talking about it, and I got so many DMs of women that were struggling. Were like, I totally resonate with what you said in that podcast or this post. And I started to realize that, okay, there's a serious problem in our space right now with women. Like, there's a serious problem that's not being talked about, because understand, like, for anybody that you follow that's gotten you on a strict ketogenic or carnivorous diet, they cannot tell you that you need carbs, because it destroys their entire narrative, right? So they're never going to do it. They're going to constantly just tell you to try something else that fits their narrative. I don't do that. I don't have a narrative. I have, what do you need, right? And I'm going to help you find that, right? And so, like, I had a lot of women that were struggling, and I realized that there was a niche there that needed help. And so I started really focusing on that. And that's all I do now. Like, I usually keep 16 clients at a time. I have one client spot available as the recording of this podcast. I have one male client. The rest of them are women. And I mean, that's what I do. I just help women heal. And it's something I'm super passionate about. And I've told clients this before. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, but I know what it's like to help other women get out of those shoes. So, I haven't been there, but I know what there is, just because of my experience with it. And so I know I'm not a woman, and that was a little nerve-wracking to start talking about it at first, because it's easy to say, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's not me, but that's true. But I think that hopefully through listening through my information and my guidance and my content, they gain a little bit of confidence and come to me for help so that they can be helped.
Yeah. Wow. I love that story through learning all that stuff. And you're right. It can break your brain to understand that whatever diet you use to ditch your insulin resistance is not the same diet that you have to be on for the rest of your life. And especially if you have health issues, you might become a little orthorexic and only think you can eat certain foods. Now, I think would be a really good time to plug your podcast. And by the way, is it called the Keto Road podcast or the Road podcast?
It's just called the Road Podcast.
The Road.
I did that intentionally because I didn't want to be just about keto.
Okay, perfect. The
Yeah.
Road podcast is fantastic. The last few episodes you've done has been, you call it a mini series. It's pretty extended to be called a mini series. It's a pretty comprehensive series on women's health. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I think it was really valid. One of the interviews you did with one of your clients, maybe it was the same client you've already mentioned. She mentioned something that I thought was interesting, where it was like, do you need carbohydrates? Like, no, you don't need carbohydrates, but they can help you optimize your health. Like, if you're not optimal, you can add them back in at certain times, and you can optimize, you can increase your health. So I thought that was a really good point. And anybody who is interested in this, we'll link it in the show notes. Go to your podcast and listen to that series. I think it's really wonderfully done. And I think you cover things in a very thoughtful and intelligent way. And look, it doesn't even have to be like you're eating carbs, doesn't mean you're eating 400 grams of sugar every single day. It means you could target certain carbohydrates at certain times for a certain optimization effect. And I think anybody could be on board with that, even if it's somebody like myself who follows a stricter carnivore diet. I think the information is really wonderful.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, we the doing the series, side note on that, is actually a lot of fun for me, because as someone with ADHD, like, the idea of doing like a podcast every single week is super hard for me. So like, I wanted to do something that was unique, that was fun. So like, doing these seasons. So like, we're taking like a 3-week break, and then I'm about to start dropping the next series, which I can talk about it here. It's called The Psychology of Food. And it's like getting into the nitty and gritty of people's like eating disorders and like talking about how they navigated that and their opinion. And it's really cool. So anyways, no, I'm glad you got a lot out of the women's health, weight loss and health series. It's good with, what was it, 15 episodes? It was 15 hours of content, I think. Like it was a
So
lot.
good. Yeah, so good. I'm not through all of them, but the ones I'm through, I'm really enjoying and really appreciating that you kind of took that angle and you're talking about something that you're right isn't talked about enough. I think now we can maybe just park temporarily the cortisol story and the women's health story, and really we can maybe go through some of the points you made in your presentation, which
Yep.
again was titled Individual Keto: How to Do Keto for Your Individual Needs. And we can pull up, those topics are going to come up. We can talk about those things as they come up in this conversation, so that hopefully we can help some people out there get good information and understand how they can shift the diet to, again, optimize their health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, okay. So to kind of like preface this, like the conversation isn't about, I'm not going to tell you a certain way to do keto. Like that's not what this talk was for. That's not what this information is going to bring you. What's going to help you do is it's going to help you understand the different macronutrients, and then based off symptom analysis, how to apply different amounts of these macronutrients to your diet, because that's what it should be about. Like the ketogenic diet shouldn't be like, okay, 75% fat, 5% carbs, 20% protein, right? It should be a diet that is a primarily fat fueled diet that has the byproduct of ketones, meaning it's primarily fat based. It burns enough fat to produce ketones. Like that should be the goal. Right now, some people 75% fat does that, 80%, some people 60, some people 50. I've personally never seen someone need less than 50% fat for their daily macronutrient intake. But like that's kind of like the whole point. The whole point I was trying to make, the whole reason I even gave the talk was because I was tired of seeing people saying, "Oh, my way's the right way. My way's the right way." And I was like, "No, this is confusing. Like, oh, I'm PKT. Oh, I'm TKD. I'm THKD. Oh, I'm animal based. Oh, I'm on a lion's diet. Oh, I'm strict carnivore. I'm CKD. I'm TKD. I'm HPKD." Like, it's like, okay, everybody calm down. Like, eat meat, sometimes eat some veggies if you really want them and need them, have some fruit, right? Like, let's simplify this a little bit because it's just gotten so confusing. The waters have gotten so murky. So the whole point of this presentation, the whole point of this talk was to help simplify things for people so that they could base it off of what they needed and not what their favorite influencer was telling them that they
I
needed.
love it. I love it.
So let's get into the fats. So really just kind of going over like different kinds of fats, right? So like I think this is important. If you're going to apply something, you should know what it is, right? So you have like different kinds of fats, right? You have your saturated fats, your monounsaturated fats, your polyunsaturated fats, which are like your omega-3s and 6s, and then your trans fats, which we all know are unbuenos. Okay. They're unbuenos. They're no buenos. Something that I really wanted to preface too, and this is the kind of information as we go, I'm just going to continue talking. You'll kind of grab onto how the presentation's formatted and the point of it. For example, right, so saturated fat and monounsaturated fat, these two are both like the big heavy hitters of fatty acids, meaning like these are the two, if you eat these two, the other ones are probably going to come in at the perfect amount. The good thing about them is that a lot of foods have both. Beef has both saturated fat and monounsaturated fat. So does fish. The beauty of it is that let's say that you're someone that can't eat meat, because there are people that are alpha GPT, meaning like they can't absorb mammals well. So like being able to eat fatty fish, fatty poultry, or even if you don't want to do fishy or don't do poultry, you just want to do fish, like you can eat these things, have a higher, more of like a Mediterranean style, still be strict keto and feel good. And the reason why I think it's important to preface that is because some people feel like they can't do keto because they can't eat red meat. And everybody out there in their DMs are like, why don't you eat red meat? Why don't you eat red meat? And it's like, oh, if I'm not doing red meat, why do I feel judged for not eating red meat? And it's like, you shouldn't. Like, if you want to eat just fish and that helps you thrive and you're eating a higher fat diet and it's healing you, like who gives a flip what anybody that's eating jerky thinks about your salmon? Like you shouldn't care, but we do because of the atmosphere that we've created. And so kind of prefacing that was really important to me is like, hey, like, do what you need to do. And if that means eating more of like a Mediterranean style keto and like backing off of like the lion's diet, then back off the red meat. Like that's okay. Now a couple signs that you're not getting enough fat would be things like, because I look at the macronutrients kind of like on a scale, like one of those old school scales, where like, you put some and it lifts and you kind of want to get them balanced. And so I look at symptoms, right? So what are the symptoms here? What are the symptoms here? And then what creates that balance where you're getting both enough of everything, but like you're balanced, right? You're not seeing those symptoms. So like signs you're not getting enough fat are things like low mental clarity, low sex drive, right? The reason why is because if you're not getting enough dietary fat and your body's happen to tap into stored body fat, could overstress your body, which is can create mental fogginess. It also can lower sex hormones, which is going to lower sex drive, because saturated fat is a precursor to cholesterol, which is a precursor to sex hormones. Huge swings in energy, just basically because if you're not getting enough fat, you could have some digestion and blood sugar dysregulation, and then rough and dry skin, because your cells are made up of fatty acids. And so if you're not getting enough fat and you're getting the wrong kinds of fat, your cell membranes aren't as healthy as they should be, right? I know plenty of people that start to eat more beef fat and all of a sudden their skin clears up. Totally makes sense from a biological perspective. Because you have to understand, like, I think one of the things that irritates me the most, so I'm not big on absolutes, but there's a couple absolutes that I believe in. One of them I'll say right now, I do not think fat is a lever. Like, fat is not just a calorie, and it really does irritate me when people treat it like that. Fat does not just, it's not just energy. It creates the structure of your cell membranes. Like, I always tell people, like, look at your hand, like, look at your hand, like, really take a second and look at this thing, move it around, and like, think about the fact that it's made up of trillions of cells. That's what makes up your hand. Your hand is made up of these cells with these cell membranes. These cell membranes are made up of fatty acids. They're made up of not only are they made up of fatty acids, they're made up of the fats you eat. So the fats you eat eventually become you, right? And I don't think people really take time to consider that. Like, you're literally made up of the fat you digest. So what kind of fats are you eating? So I do think that's important. It's like fat is not a lever, that you can lower your fat to lower your caloric intake, but realize that at some point the cons will not be worth the pros, because you're stripping not just calories from your body, but you're stripping the building blocks that it needs to function.
See, that's a really good point. I am of the habit of saying that fat is a lever. And you're right. It's so much more than that. And all the precursors to all the other hormones. It is so important. I need to get out of the habit of saying that. It's a really good point.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like, it definitely can be lowered, right? Like especially if you're on like a carnivore diet, right? Like, cutting the fat off. So like if you're like maintaining, this is a real simple way of doing it, is like you have a ribeye and you have like the fat cap, you leave it on. If you want to lose weight, you cut the fat cap off, right? It's like 300 calories. You do that twice a day, you're going to lose weight. It's like, it makes sense from that point, but I think that, and the whole reason I'm against the terminology is just because, like, it's the environment that it creates for people, where like they start to lose weight, but then they start to feel bad and their sex hormones start to suffer, but then they stop losing weight because their body's stressed out. The only thing they know to do is just to keep lowering fat. They never think to raise fat and lower protein a little bit, just to help their body have a certain level of nutrients coming in while it's still losing weight. And so, like, I think that just that level of the tunnel vision can really hinder like other aspects of your health without realizing it.
Yeah, fair point.
So that's fats, right? So that's generally fats, right? So like if you have huge swings of energy, you have low libido, low mental focus, rough and dry skin, like, really consider upping your fats. If you have a hard time digesting animal fats, switch to fish fats. It's totally fine. Olive oil and avocado oil are also fine. You want to try and get them from the actual fruits, like from avocado and from olives. But if you can't, and always go for, you want it to be sourced from one location. You want it to be in a dark green glass bottle. And boom, there you go. You want to have a little bit of a burn on the back of the tongue with the olive oil. It's how you know the polyphenols are in it.
Yeah, another really good point.
Yeah. All right. So protein. Protein is a lot like fat in that it's essential, right? And so, like, you need protein. Humans need protein, whether you like it or not. Now, something we have to understand. Protein is essential for longevity. It's essential not just for muscle growth. Again, we get really narrow about this. Protein is a calorie. I don't think people say protein is not a calorie. Your body will definitely use it to make calories. Like, don't put it past it to do it. It will do what it needs to do to survive. It is a survivor, and it is a really efficient survivor. But it's also not just for muscle growth. It's also for skin and bone health, and it's also for immune health. We have these things called complement proteins in our system, and those things recognize antigens and allergens. And those are like the first warriors of your immune system to target things is literally proteins. So like, everything in your body is made up of amino acids, right? Everything. And so protein is super important. So you have to ask yourself, what is good protein sources, right? And so I kind of showed this systematic review, or this systematic review looking at studies of animal protein versus plant protein. And they found that you need much more plant protein to get the same amount of effect as animal protein. Problem with that is that if you're trying to lose weight, you're trying to maintain the amount of food you would have to eat to get in the same amount of quality protein might put you over in calories. So you might be gaining fat just to eat enough protein when you could just be eating animal meat. I will say this again, this is my second absolute. So my first absolute is fat is not a lever. My second absolute is that humans were designed to eat animals. We just are, like, and I understand some people from like from a philosophical standpoint or a spiritual standpoint have a hard time with that. Feel free to eat things like eggs or eat things like fish. Even if you're just eating eggs, even if eggs is the only thing you can eat, right? And you have chickens that are just laying them anyways, and they don't have a rooster, so they're not being fertilized. So they're just going to go bad. Like, they're not going to hatch. They're just going to go bad. You just have chickens that are just living a great life. You're feeding them well. You're not going to kill them or anything. And they just lay these eggs. Eat the eggs. Just eat the eggs. They're going to go bad if you don't. They're not going to get fertilized. They're not going to pop into chicks. Eat the eggs, right? And that's enough, right? Just eating like 10 eggs a day can be a game changer for a lot of people. I know you were doing that crazy 24 eggs a day. It was freaking savage. I love
Well,
that.
well, thanks, dude. I was thinking to myself the other day how ironic it was that I had a giant plate of eggs with a bunch of butter, and I thought, this is a vegetarian meal. This is a vegetarian meal. I'm not killing animals by eating this meal. This could fit in a vegetarian's
Yeah,
diet, correct? Like,
yeah.
butter would count, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I would even say, like, for me, like, okay, so I don't consider dairy a vegan food. I definitely think dairy is vegetarian, but I
Mhm.
consider eggs a vegan food because, again, unless they're fertilized, if a rooster does not exist in a pack of hens and these hens are just living a good life at your house, these eggs will really literally just rot and die. There's literally no point in not eating them. Like, you're not harming the animal. Like, an argument can be made for like dairy, and like, I get it, you're taking milk from the baby, or like you're inseminating the cow to get the milk. I understand some of the ill will towards that. I understand some of the feelings towards that. I get it. Chicken eggs, literally, they will just pop them out. There's nothing you can do about it. Like, they're not going anywhere. They literally will just rot, right? So like, eat them, right? So I consider eggs a vegan food. I don't understand why vegans don't eat eggs.
That's fascinating. Game changer. You just mentioned it. That would be a crazy game changer for vegans and their health.
Yeah, they could literally follow their entire diet if they just added like 10 eggs a day. If they got
Amazing.
10 chickens, let them live a nice, robust life and pasture raised, and just picked up their eggs every morning that weren't going to go anywhere or do anything anyways, and ate them with their meals. They could literally keep the rest of their diet if they wanted to. Because overall,
Fascinating.
they remove all their processed food. So if you add in all these healthy fats and proteins from eggs, you're putting yourself in a really good spot overall. But yeah, so they looked at the study and they found that. Now, I did preface though that the study did not test an environment where the participants were not lifting weights. So basically, like, all the studies that they reviewed, there was never an environment where no one was working out. So they couldn't really say that on a baseline format. So what they're saying is like, oh, well, if you work out, then this shows that animal protein is better than plant protein. But if you don't work out, there's no evidence that it's better. And it's like, okay, so don't work out and then you can eat celery. Like, you don't have to eat protein at all. You don't have to eat animal meat if you don't lift weights, which is, I don't understand why they had to preface that, because you should be lifting weights, but I understand it's a study. But I wanted to show I was being unbiased. I was just reading the study for its.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we've hosted Dr. Hamilton Rochelle, who was on that same study, and he made the point that we showed in the study that the plant protein, the addition of plant protein to whatever protein you're getting in the diet is as effective as an animal based protein. But there were a lot of flaws in that study. When you actually read it, it was like untrained males who they were also doing workouts and they're getting protein. It's like, yeah, that's probably the exact group that you would want to have in that study if you wanted to show that plant protein was fine. So I'm pretty critical of that study too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the pro sources, right? Because now you know all the sources of protein. So like, really any ruminant animal, and the reason why is because like ruminants, even if they're grain fed slightly, like their digestive system is so complex that there is a difference between grain fed and grass fed in terms of like omega-6s for sure, but it's not insane, right? So like ruminants are always a good go-to because even if you can't get the most expensive cuts, you're still going to get generally a pretty healthy piece of meat. Wild game's always hands down the best in my opinion. If you can find a good fat to add to the wild game, it's a great move. Poultry, can be a dirty animal, but for lack of, it's still good in terms of amino acid profile. It's great. And then fish. Fish, the smaller the fish, the better because it's just going to have less toxic metals. But like wild caught fish of any kind is always good. And the good thing is most wild caught fish is super cheap. Like wild caught fish is not like I can go to HEB right now and get a can of wild caught sardines for $1 a can. Like I can literally eat like that could be like the main portion of my lunch for, I can do 3 cans. It's $3 a day. Like, and I think it's like, I don't know what, like 600 calories for $3. It's like, what? Like that and rotisserie chicken and I'm good. Like that's all you need.
Amazing.
But yeah, so those would be like good sources of protein. And then signs you're not eating enough protein, right? So prolonged soreness after workouts, lack of gym progress, dry skin, cracked fingernails, right? Because amino acids are both in your skin and your fingernails, collagen, things like that, weak tendons and joints. And then the prolonged soreness after workouts is basically like you do legs and like 3 days later, you're still sore and you're like, why? And you're looking like, oh, I haven't had enough protein. You need more protein. Now, so it's kind of like the protein portion of things, understanding like those signs. And so that's the trick, right? It's like looking at your fats and proteins and figuring out, okay, like, am I eating too much fat? Am I eating too much protein? Well, what signs am I experiencing, right? It's like, oh, well, I feel good mentally, but I'm super sore after workouts. And maybe somebody's like, I'm never sore. I always recover really well, but there's always this fogginess to my day. And so you have to find that balance of like, I feel pretty good. I have good mental clarity and I'm not getting I recover pretty fast. Okay, great. I'm in a good spot here. Now, something to preface though, before we get into the next subject, which is carbohydrates, these two need to be taken care of first. So what you do is you put these in a good spot. Once these two are in a good spot, at first you're going to get rid of your symptoms. You will, especially if you come from a standard American diet, but eventually you'll start to notice you start to develop other symptoms, which we'll get to in a second. So the key is to make sure everything else is taken care of before you address increasing carbohydrates, because carbohydrates should never be a band-aid to a wound that needs stitches. Okay. It can be very powerful, but it shouldn't be the band-aid to the wound that needs stitches. What are the stitches? Eating enough food, getting enough fat, getting in the right amount of protein, your sleep, your training schedule, making sure you're getting in enough rest time. Those are the stitches. If the wound gets stitched up and then it keeps bleeding and it needs carbs, then it needs carbs. But it's really important to understand that all those other things are essential. And this is the one thing we're going to talk about that is not needed, but can help people optimize, as you so well put from the Road podcast a couple episodes ago. So carbohydrates, are they needed to live? No. Do you need them to be optimal? It really depends. Now, what I think is really important to talk about too is we love to talk about fatty acids. Like if I come to you and I say, hey, fatty acids are bad, what are you going to say?
Well, they're essential, but I mean, I can't necessarily cut them out.
Yeah, but what if I say they're bad? Like what if I say fats are bad?
I mean, good question. What should I say?
You're supposed to
I'm not
say,
answering
no,
your
they're not
question very
bad.
well.
No, you're good. You're good.
Oh, I understand. I understand. So like, if you ask somebody on the street, what would they say if you said fatty acids are bad? They would say like, okay, yeah, I know that.
Yeah, or like if you go to someone in the keto community, I think this is because like with the carb conversation, a lot of people on the street won't think carbs are necessarily bad. Like they're important, right? But like in the keto carnivorous space, if I go up to somebody and say, hey, fats are bad, they'll go, no, not all fats are bad. Saturated fats are good. Mono are good. It's just really bad polys and trans fats, right? So they can separate different kinds of fatty acids,
Yeah,
right?
that
And
makes sense.
immediately in their head, right? But when they talk about carbs, they immediately paint them all in one light. They immediately go, carbs are bad. Now, protein, if I say, hey, all proteins are bad, they'll go, no. Animal proteins are good. Vegetable proteins are meh. Pork rinds are not a complete protein source. They'll be able to like separate proteins and amino acids like nobody's business. But again, you say carbs are good or bad, and it's all one big ball. It's just one word. And that bothers me because we go into the narrative that we've adopted with not treating every macronutrient with the same respect. And if we're going to understand them, we need to treat them with the same respect. So I tell people often, I don't want you to choose to not eat carbs out of a place of fear, but out of a place of knowledge. If you understand them and then you realize you don't need them, that's one thing. But to just not eat them because you've been taught to be afraid of them is not healthy. That's orthorexia. That's a slow seed plant of orthorexia. And for those who don't know what orthorexia is, because we mentioned that earlier, orthorexia is an eating disorder where you are like OCD towards dietary preferences that leads to bodily harm. So like you're not eating, but you're basically eating like a piece of kale every day because that's healthy and you won't eat anything else. Or like with keto, even though you like feel miserable, you're only eating ground beef because that's what you feel. It's like the only thing you can eat because everything else is Satan itself, right? Like that is orthorexia. Now some people only eat ground beef because they feel really good on only ground beef, and that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about people that are willing to hurt themselves for the sake of sticking to a certain dietary narrative, right? So that would be orthorexia. Anyways, so we have to understand carbohydrates. So there are 11 different kinds of carbohydrates, and they're broken up into 4 categories of monosaccharides, polysaccharides, oligosaccharides, and dialysaccharides. I can't remember the exact term. I have it somewhere. But anyway, so they're broken up into 4. So 11 broken up into 4. Yeah, so it's, aha, I got it. Yeah, I was right. Monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. And then there's different substrates of all those below, right? It comes out to 11. And what's really important is while they're all technically sugar, just like fatty acids are all technically fat, they do different things in the body. The way they digest, the way they're absorbed impacts the body biologically differently, right? So like, for example, right, what really bothers me is like when someone compares a funnel cake to an apple, right? Like a funnel cake is it's generally 1 kind to 2 kinds of carbohydrate. It's going to be glucose and maybe a starch, maybe like white flour, but a very simple starch. And then the rest of it is seed oils. Like that's the rest of, like, a funnel cake is almost like 50% fat. Like it's like a really bad food, but like it's nothing. An apple is 5 different kinds of carbohydrate, and it's literally that's like a true carb. A funnel cake, but when we hear funnel cake, we think of carb, like, oh, I don't eat carbs. And it's like, well, you don't eat a lot because funnel cakes are way more than just a carb. But like an apple, a piece of fruit is a true carb, and it's made up of it's called the food matrix. It's made up of many different kinds of carbohydrates that send different kinds of signals to your body and digest in different ways. So understand that's super important. Now, what can overconsumption of carbs do? It can create insulin resistance, diabetes, promote disordered eating habits, all the things that we've experienced. The whole reason we're even keto, the whole reason you're listening to this podcast right now, right? But what can carbs benefit for you? They can improve insulin sensitivity, they can regulate blood sugar, they can promote fat burning, and they can fight inflammation. Now you read these 2 boxes and you go, well, these don't sound, they're literally the exact opposite. You don't know what you're talking about. But the thing is, I can replace these with different kinds of fatty acids and you would agree with me, right? If I put, canola oil over one, and I say canola oil causes insulin resistance, diabetes, promotes disordered eating habits, and pro-inflammatory environments, you would go, oh, it does. And if I said saturated fats improve insulin sensitivity, regulate blood sugar, promote fat burning, and fight inflammation, you would go, this makes sense now, right? Again, we're very hypocritical when it comes to how we treat carbs versus fats, but every macronutrient can be separated into these 2 categories, depending on how they're used.
Well, yeah, it breaks your brain if you've been on keto for so long to hear that carbohydrates can actually improve the situation with cortisol. That's not very intuitive to people.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully I can explain why that happens, because I think people often so for most people, I think it's important, right? Because I do have friends that believe that like everybody should like eat carbs at some point. Like no one should be strict keto forever. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think some people feel really good on strict keto the rest of their lives, and I think that's fine. Or strict carnivore. I think that's fine. I think there's people that don't. Okay. And so how do you distinguish if you're one of these people? So what you guys understand, first of all, is that keto is a stressor. A ketogenic environment in your body is a stressor, meaning your body gets stressed dealing with it. How so? Well, when you're in keto, when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're in a ketogenic state, your body is lowering blood sugar because it's using it. And then your body, once it goes below baseline, your body has to Cooper. All right. So when you're in a ketogenic state, your body is pulling blood sugar away to do its bodily function. It needs 30% glucose. So it's pulling that out of the bloodstream. To be able to get that back, it has to release cortisol to trigger a process called gluconeogenesis, which is great. It's amazing that your body can do that process. I'm not trying to demonize any process in your body. I think it's fascinating that we can even do that as humans. The problem, though, is that it does continually leak cortisol. Now, mind you, albeit very, very small amount, which is no big deal. The problem is when this is stacked on top of a lot of other cortisol, right? So like this is stacked up on top of the stress from fasting, which is stacked on top of the stress of training, which is stacked on top of your family and life stress, right? Now, for a man, that's kind of where it stops, right? The only time it goes past that is where he has some kind of intense training of some kind that is also very cortisol dependent. And then they spill over. For women, they don't have to do an extra sport. Their cycle can be extremely cortisol impactful. And so what happens is it spills over. And when keto makes your cortisol level spill over, you're leaching out cortisol to deal with the stress, which is raising your blood sugar, which is then creating inflammation in your body slowly over time. And what ends up happening is once that chronic blood sugar creates the inflammation in your body because it's chronically being outputted, that is another stressor. Inflammation's a stressor, right? That's why we feel bad when we're on the standard American diet. Inflammation's bad. And so that also makes your body release cortisol. And so literally you start to create this internal cycle that we know as physiological insulin resistance. And it's much more common in women than it is in men. Again, men, it tends to be more common when they're endurance athletes or they're like CrossFitters or something really, really cortisol creating like that. And so the thing is what do? Well, you can either remove the stressor or you can nutritionally, you can use nutritional therapy to intervene. And so the first option obviously is to remove the stressor. So if the stressor is bad sleep, right? You might be listening to this and thinking, oh, I might need carbs, and realize that, I just need 8 hours of sleep a night. I just suck at sleep. You may need to stop working out 7 days a week. No one needs to do that. Give yourself 2 or 3 rest days a week. If you've been chronically dieting, maybe stop fasting so much and eat 3 meals a day, right? Do that. These things may solve your problem, right? I want you to deal with them first. I call them the dirty 5. Are you eating enough? Are you getting enough dietary fat? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you hydrated? And are you resting enough? Those are the 5 dirty ones. If those things are good and you're still experiencing these symptoms, okay, now I'm going to go over, then, okay, carbs can play a role. That's when you know if carbs should play a role. How do we know this? Or how do we know this? Because carbs are the only macronutrient that we have scientific literature on that show that they suppress cortisol. It's a reason why we crave them when we're stressed, right? You crave sweets when you're stressed because your body wants them to shunt the cortisol outreach or creation. And so your body craves those for a reason. I'm not saying you should give into it. I'm just saying realize that it's not just impulse. There's also intuition going on there as well, which is something I tell my eating disorder clients that are trying to realize they need to bring carbs back in and try and help them navigate that. Is like realize that like you have 2 voices and you've been trying to ignore the impulse one for so long that the intuition got caught up in the mix, and you have to learn to separate the two, which is hard, but it's important to learn how to do. And so bringing carbohydrates in strategically can help blunt cortisol, which is going to lower your baseline blood sugar, which is going to make you more insulin sensitive, which is going to let you tap back into fat stores. And so someone that has physiological insulin resistance from being strict keto, they'll notice that the carbs actually help them burn fat better. So carbs are making your ketogenic diet more sustainable long-term for you. And that's kind of like as long as that was the quick elevator speech behind the carbohydrates.
I love that. Again, for somebody who's been in this world for a long time, that would sound totally counterintuitive. And so that's why I really appreciate that nuance to it. So if somebody is addressing those 5 things, which I love that approach, address those first, and then they notice that they're still having issues when they're talking about reintroducing carbohydrates. What are we talking about? Is this like you can have 100 grams, 500 grams, you can eat cake, you should have apple slices, like where are we as far as like recommendations for what that person should be doing?
No, that's a good point. So when I say carbs, I mean carb foods, like true carbs. True carbs are what I call whole food carbs. So foods that are purely carbs, right? So like your fruits, your tubers, your squashes. I'm not big on grains. I'm okay with gluten-free ones. Like I'm okay with white rice, and then I'm okay with organic non-GMO oatmeal. I am okay with that one too, as long as it doesn't have glyphosate on it. But gluten grains, especially in America, it's just best to avoid those. But outside of gluten-filled grains, I would say if it grows or make noise, eat it. uh, but yeah, so when I'm saying carbs, I'm talking about like whole food ones, like fruit-bearing plants, tubers, squashes, things like that. As far as introducing them, it really depends on where you're starting. Some clients, it really like some people, what I would say is slowly introduce them. If you're a carnivore, I would start at like, I would start at like 20 or 30 grams a day, and then I would increase it by 10 every single week after that. So like, let's say you're doing like 20 or 30 a day. Like, let's say you're doing 30, you start for week 1, 30 a day. Week 2 would be 40 a day. Week 3 would be 50 a day. Week 4, like give your body time to adapt to it. And let you
I
get
mean,
used
that's
to
a
it.
tiny amount, right?
Yeah, it's very, very small. But if you give it time, within 7 weeks, almost 2 months, you'll be up to 70, 80 grams of carbs or 100 grams of carbs, which is good. So that's the thing. Don't stop at 70 or 80. So that's something I've really learned just from observation. And this is very much pseudoscience. There is no, like, if we're trying to fix hormones with carbohydrates, cycling them into a ketogenic diet, there's no benefit of them within like the 60 to 80 gram of carb range. I call that wonderland. Like nothing's happening. Like your body's getting enough carbs to where it's not really keto, but it's not really getting enough to really stimulate insulin the way it needs to. So it's kind of like, okay, what's going on here? It's kind of
No
confusing.
man's land.
It's no man's land. So I like to say you should at least strive for 100 grams of carbs. Now, if you're really worried about it, one thing you can do is you can start by only doing this on days. So like once you get up to 100, you can start this by only doing it on days that you work out. That way it's kind of killing two birds with one stone. It's replenishing glycogen post-workout, and it's also blunting cortisol. So it's kind of doing both. And then just go back to keto or carnivore on your rest days. I know people that do that all the time. That's stage 2. So stage 1 is slowly increase. Stage 2 is cycle on and off of it with your training days, which is what I do. And then stage 3 for women would learn how to apply it to your cycle on a 28-day span. Like there's certain weeks of your cycle. So you have your menstrual phase, your follicular phase, your ovulation, your luteal phase. For dietary stakes, the menstrual and follicular phase will combine. Those two are like your fat burning. Your estrogen and testosterone are starting to peak up, going towards ovulation. It's when your body wants to look attractive, right? Because it wants to mate for reproduction, right? From purely biological, that's when your body as a woman wants to look as feminine and sleek as possible. So it's the best time to work out, eat keto, carnivore, feel good. And then ovulation comes, and some women do need some carbs. Sometimes ovulation can be stressful, but for some, it's like the best time to go in the gym and do PRs. Testosterone is going to be the highest. You're going to feel the most confident. And then luteal phase starts. And luteal phase is when we start to slowly increase the carbs. So like the first week I do 50 to 80 grams. And then the second week I'll do 100 to 150, depending on the woman and how active she is. And then the cycle starts. Now, something to preface, stage 3, I would not do right off the bat, because if you are healing from like 3 years of strict carnivore, and then we start giving you 2 weeks of just carnivore, and then we're not healing anything. So like I always say, like most women, I start on either 1 or 2, and then eventually we'll get to stage 3. So that's kind of like the way that I would approach it. And of course, there's a lot of nuance there, and like picking the right foods. If I can give anybody a tip on that, if they're listening and they want to try this on their own, I really do recommend getting a coach, and you don't have to get me. Like honestly, like I only have one client spot as of this recording. I only can take one person anyways, but get a coach, because it's really hard to navigate, especially if you're scared. But if you are going to try and navigate it, one piece of advice I can give you is do not reintroduce trauma-based foods. Meaning if it's something you used to binge on, don't bring it back into your diet.
Mhm.
So like, for example, I had a client, she used to binge on white potato. She's never had white potato. We just did sweet potato instead. She had never had it before, and she had no problems. Generally, it's the association with foods that trigger trauma that cause a big issue. So like she has raspberries, but she won't eat bananas because she used to binge banana pudding, right? So like little things like that. And then obviously, like, yeah, don't eat cake. Like a cake is not just a carb. A cake is shortening and fat, and buttercream, and it's so much more than like. So when I say carb, I mean like a whole food grown from the ground carbohydrate. But that's generally some of the advice I would give.
This is very reasonable advice. even at 150 grams of carbohydrates, for somebody that is active, I would strongly contend that they're probably still quote unquote ketogenic in that state, consuming 150 grams of carbohydrates. They would be working them off if they're very active and doing lots of exercise. You're not talking about massive amounts of carbohydrates or reintroducing terrible foods. It's something that you can bring back slowly in a really thoughtful and mindful way, which I really appreciate. Is there anything to the timing of when those carbohydrates fall? Like, should somebody be snacking on them, a small amount all day, or is it better to get them all in one meal? And if they do, which meal would be more optimal?
So, okay, so I'm not really big on meal timing with it. I don't like snacking. I'm still bit like, because like snacking, we only snack because we have access to snacks. Like that's the only reason humans snack. So I'm really big on I'm big on square meals. Like and if you eat three, that's fine. Eat 3 meals a day. I don't care. As far as the carb timing, I have found it really depends on the individual. People tend to be more insulin sensitive on with breakfast and lunch. So I tend to tell people like work out fasted and then have your carbs with breakfast and lunch. But other people love having carbs with dinner because it helps them sleep, because it blunts the ketones and the cortisol right before bed and it helps them fall asleep and stay asleep. A lot of people that have been keto for too long and they do have chronic cortisol, they'll notice they can't sleep very much. They're constantly waking up. They're constantly peeing. Your body should be able to hold its bladder all night. So the fact that you're getting up 5 times a night to go pee, definitely a cortisol issue. So some people like eating some carbs before bed. So I would say that it really depends on the person. But if you'd ask me just from a purely like biological standpoint, like when's the best time? Definitely like early morning, afternoon.
Okay, that's wonderful advice. Now, I guess I'm going to really appreciate your perspective on this with the eating disorder background. Psychologically, it's one thing to tell somebody to do this, but psychologically, for the person that has been doing this for a really long time, how do you convince them that they can bring carbohydrates back in and it's going to help them feel better? Like, how do you bring that up to somebody? That's very difficult.
That's a good question. So I think one of the first things to preface is that optimal health is not worth loss of health, meaning like if you're not in a place psychologically where you can handle reintroducing carbs, it's better for you to be suboptimal than just completely fall off the wagon. So I always tell people, like, even if you realize that you need this, if you know you're not ready for it, don't try it, because I'd rather you like not feel your best than gain the 300 pounds back because you fell off. Right. So I think that's really important to preface. Now, getting someone to wrap their minds around this, in my experience, takes time. It's more like when I'm working with a client, it's more of like, at first they don't trust themselves at all. So they just have to trust me. And I say that line more than you would think every week of, if you don't trust yourself right now, just trust me. I got you. And so it's like them just blindly doing what I say because they don't know where else to turn. And then over time, as they see the weight come off and the blood sugar get better and feel better, they start to trust the process more. And so it's a time thing. It takes time. And part of this is a leap of faith. Part of this is saying, I know what I've been told, but I'm seeing something contrary to it, and I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm going to bet on me. I'm going to try it out. Because like for me, like when I first reintroduced carbs, I was really scared too, but like I wanted to live a full life. And I realized that what I was doing wasn't allowing me to. I was either going to have to give up running or I was going to have to figure something out. And running was really a big part of my life now at that point, and I wasn't willing to give it up. And so I had to bet on myself and take a leap. And I remember the first time I had a sweet potato, it was freaking scary, dude. I hadn't had a sweet potato in 4 years. And then I ate it, and then I checked my blood sugar 2 hours post-perennial, and it was 79. And my mind was blown. And I was like, this makes no sense. And I just over time gained more and more confidence in it. And I say that saying like, it still feels wrong. Like the other day, I needed a quick breakfast. And so I have like these steel cut oats, and it was one of my carb days. And I could tell by the way my joints felt and all that. Oh yeah, wait, I didn't even get to the symptoms, but I'll get to that in a second. All that, but I could tell I needed them. And so I popped them in the microwave, and I ate a bowl of like just plain oats. And I was like, in the moment, I was like, this feels dirty. But then like an hour later, I felt so much better. Like my body felt better. And I knew, and I checked my blood sugar and I was in the 80s. I was lower. I was 2 points lower than I was before I had the oatmeal. So like my body just soaked it up. My body just responded so metabolically healthy to it. And I just knew I needed it. Right. And so there's little moments of confidence over time that have kind of built the way that I eat. And so I would just tell people, like, you have to take a leap of faith a little bit there to start it. And I know it's hard. I know it's not going to be easy, but if you want to heal, you have to be willing to take risks. You took a risk. Never forget, you took a risk when you first went keto. It was scary then. This is going to be scary now, but that's okay.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Let's hear some of the signs and symptoms. And then we have not a time limitation today, but a battery limitation today because I've recorded 2 in a row. I've gotten messages that my battery's about to die. I'm loving this conversation. I hope I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but I hope you would have time to come back sometime to continue with this conversation because I am enjoying every second of this. But let's talk about signs and symptoms and make sure we give you time before my battery dies to tell people where they can go to find you.
Absolutely. Okay. So signs and symptoms. So one big one's irregular cycles in women. So like if your cycle is super irregular on keto or you just don't have one, big sign that you need carbs, big sign. Especially if you're eating enough, you're getting enough fat, you're training, you're resting, you're sleeping well, all that's happening and you're still getting irregular cycles, big sign you need carbs. Lack of fat loss on prolonged keto. So like you're starting to gain weight on keto, even though your calories haven't changed, you're eating a lot of food, you're not super hungry. You're just like, what is going on? There's a big sign that you probably have too much cortisol. So really it's not signs that you are not eating enough carbs. It's more signs that you have chronic cortisol, which means you need to eat carbs. Nonstop cravings, right? So like, are you constantly craving sugar, even though you've been keto for years? Your body's probably telling you that it wants carbs. Achy joints because cortisol strips proteins from your joints. So achy joints can be a huge sign of needing to suppress cortisol via carbs. Lack of gym performance. So if you're getting in enough protein and you just notice that like, it's not that you're sore every day, but like you're just not getting stronger, you feel weak and tired in the gym all the time. You know how many clients I've helped change their lives by making them take a spoonful of honey before a workout? It's a game changer for so many women. Mental fatigue and drowsiness, meaning like even though you're eating enough fat, you're just tired all the time. Big sign you have chronic cortisol and you need to add carbs back in.
Yeah. Wow. What a wonderful list. And again, what a wonderful conversation. I knew you were my people when I saw that presentation. You talk about as quickly as I do, which I absolutely love. Hope people can slow this one down because we got a lot of information in a short amount of time. It was absolutely wonderful. I really love your work and how thoughtful it is and how you can, remain in the keto world and say that it's important for certain things, but also there's other things to consider. So, like I said, I hope we can get you back on the show again sometime to take this even a little bit deeper. I know we're going to get tons of questions on this one, and again, I just really appreciate you and your time. But for now, Jonathan Shane, where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So anything the Keto Road, Instagram at the Keto Road, TikTok, the Keto Road, theketoroad.com, the Keto Road at gmail.com, or you can message me personally, John at theketoroad.com. We do free consultations. So if you go to the website, you can sign up for a free consultation and see if the coaching or, pick my brain, whatever. So check that out. And then performancegains.org. Just don't even worry about the spelling. It's spelled weird, but just spell it right. Performancegains.org, and it'll take you to the website. And then so that's where you can find me. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, that will give us a lot of things that we can talk about next time. I really want to talk about performance gains as well. But for now,
Oh,
Jonathan, go ahead.
I was gonna say also, if you go to my Instagram, women, if you want to just try some of my tips, I have a free Primal Women guide that you can check out. So that's free too. So
Nice. That's great. Yeah,
yeah.
we will link all of that in the show notes. And again, Jonathan, just so much appreciate your energy and everything that you've struggled through and suffered through and your desire to share that now and to, share a message that's not going to be very well received by a lot of people in the community, but it needs to be heard and you're bringing it up. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your time. And thank you very much for being on our show today. I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Yeah, man. Absolutely, dude. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It was an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.